Hey everyone, I'm Kyle Racki and excited to be part of the Data Talks event happening here. I'm going to be talking today about the subject of moving up market when you run a SaaS company, why you would do it, what are the benefits, and a little bit about my history at Proposify and how we've moved up market and done it successfully, and what are the different things that you need to keep in mind and consider as you do that. So, to kick things off, just going to give a quick who am I? Run a company called Proposify. We are based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is the eastern side of Canada. And we have about 10,000 paying customers, a bit over 100 employees, and we've been around for about 7 years. What we do is we help sales leaders get more control and visibility into their closing process and specifically their proposal process. So our software essentially helps reps speed up their document creation with proposals and contracts and get sign off from their prospects, but it also gives the sales leader more insight into how prospects are interacting with their proposals and allows them to put some guardrails in place to minimize errors when reps are creating proposals. So that's a little bit about who I am, who we are at Proposify. Now let's talk about moving up market. Why would you do such a thing? What does that even mean? So what happens a lot is when you run a SaaS company that is primarily driven through free signups or free trials, and everything is more or less product led. You've got people who at the end of their trial they put in their credit card and they sign up to a self-serve plan. That really well describes kind of our first few years at Proposify. And eventually we decided, well, we want to increase the size of our deals, the size of the customers that are coming through our platform. So there's a few reasons why you would consider a move up market. And one of those is that if you're primarily self-serve, it can be difficult to scale based on the unit economics. So as customer acquisition costs increase, which historically they are, this is a chart from ProfitWell, and we see that it's becoming more and more expensive over time to acquire new customers. Advertising is getting more expensive. There's a variety of reasons behind that. But essentially, the more expensive it becomes to bring new customers into your funnel or your pipeline, the more then you need to extract from them in order to make it profitable. So if a customer is only paying you $10 a month, let's say, but it costs you $500 to bring them in and they only stick around for maybe a year before they cancel, you're just losing money. And so this is what we call the CAC Payback Period. So when you look at how much it costs you to acquire a customer, and then based on how much they spend with you, how long does it take to actually pay back the acquisition cost? That's what the payback period is. Let's say it costs you 12 months to pay back the CAC. Well, then everything after that, as long as you retain them, is going to be more profitable. So that's what we talk about CAC payback model. Now, if you're looking to build a $10 million ARR SaaS business or more, it's going to require either a lot more customers that pay you maybe not so much in dollars, or it's going to require you relatively fewer customers, but the value of that contract or that deal has to be higher, the ACV, the annual contract value. And then there's kind of a little sweet spot in between. So you're probably familiar with other SaaS companies that do this to varying degrees. Is customers, companies that have tons of very small customers. Think maybe a company like Basecamp or Buffer, for example. Then you've got the enterprise where customers are maybe spending $1 million a year. There's not that many of them, but they pay an exorbitant amount of money to use the software. And then you've got companies like HubSpot that maybe the average deal size is about $10K a year, and that's kind of in the middle there. So one reason that companies want to move up market is because they want to sell bigger deals, because it means a more effective advertising spend, and the unit economics are healthier. The other reason why companies sometimes want to move up market is that if you sell those small customers who maybe they pay you $10 a month or 50 or even $100 a month, you're always going to find that the churn is higher. They're going to cancel at a higher rate. Now, there's reasons for that. Smaller customers tend to go to business faster than a large enterprise. Um, the switching cost also tends to be lower for smaller customers. So if it's only one individual or a couple at a company, it's pretty easy for them to just switch to something else if they find something better. Whereas if a large customer's gone through a sales process and there's been onboarding and they've sort of built all of their processes around this tool, it becomes very hard for them to leave. So churn is always going to be higher on small plans. And this is what we found at Proposify, is that we kind of, for a long time, broke our customers into these three segments and averaged out their pricing. So we'll call the small, medium, and large buckets of customers. And you can see from this, this is just a snapshot from 1 month, but it's pretty averaged out. You can see that the logo churn, in other words, how many accounts do we lose in a month from this plan, or what percentage of accounts do we lose? The net MRR churn, how much revenue or MRR do we lose when these customers go? And also net MRR churn is factoring upgrades. So that's why you see there's negative churn there on the larger accounts. That means that they're across those accounts, they're actually upgrading and spending more than we're losing due to downgrades or cancellations. So you can see that negative net MRR churn is where you want to be. That's a very scalable customer segment. If the churn is higher, then you're going to, it's going to be harder to scale. You can see the lifetime value there. So based on their churn, based on the amount they pay, we see that small segment had about a $700, give or take $800 lifetime value. That's how much they're going to spend within their lifetime as a customer. And comparatively, not that much more in spend per month. So customers on that 173 segment, they only spend, maybe 4 or 5 times more with us, but because the churn is better, the lifetime value is 10 times better. And you can see on the largest tier, well, a $91,000 LTV is very strong, and you can actually spend more to acquire those customers because the lifetime value is so strong. So unit economics and churn all factor into why you would want to sell bigger deal sizes. And obviously, with churn comes harder to scale MRR. So one of the other reasons why you want to kind of switch to customers that have lower churn is because it becomes very difficult to scale revenue at a certain size when your churn is high. The other idea is that, moving up market scales revenue faster and more predictably. So this kind of encapsulates all of the ideas found here of why people would want to move up market. Now let's get into the how. So, okay, you've decided you want to sell bigger deals. How do you actually move up market? Well, I call them the 3 Ps. I think these are the 3 most critical areas to look at when you're looking at moving up market: is positioning, pricing, and product. And I'm going to kind of break those down and offer a little bit more detail there. So the first one is positioning. What is positioning? Well, really, it's the foundation for all of your marketing activity. Your messaging, your brand, in a lot of cases, your product are all going to be spun out from your positioning. If you've ever read the great book, Crossing the Chasm, it uses this analogy of a beachhead. So if you're going to invade, a country, hopefully nobody's invading any countries here, but let's just say if you were, are you going to try to conquer the whole country from every side, just take over it all at once? Well, you just wouldn't have the resources to do that. It makes more sense to choose a beachhead. Choose one area to focus on and then spread out from there. And so that's the whole idea with positioning, is you need to choose a market that you want to go after. For Proposify, in the early days, we focused primarily on small digital agencies. That was our beachhead. And a lot of our positioning, brand, messaging, all of that was based on selling to small digital agencies. And then we expanded over time. A great book by April Dunford is called Obviously Awesome. It's all about positioning. So it's an actual framework to go through to nail down your positioning. And the framework is these 6 questions you need to ask and the order that you need to ask them in. So April Dunford recommends starting with the competing alternatives. So if you're looking to move up market, they may not be buying the software for the same reason your other customers are. We experienced this with Proposify because a lot of our value proposition that we were selling to really small customers was all about increasing your close rate and sending out documents faster and faster sign off, and et cetera. That messaging didn't resonate as much to larger companies where they were more focused on minimizing errors, more control over their documents. So we had to reassess our positioning, and this is the framework we went through. So if you didn't exist, what would this new customer that you're going after, this large enterprise or this mid-market company, what would they be using if they weren't using you? And you'll find that oftentimes they will be using something, even if they're not using a direct competitor. They're using a spreadsheet, or they're using some kind of clunky enterprise, custom built in-house tool or something like that. So what would they use? And then when you know the alternative, how is yours better? What are the unique aspects of this product that make using your software 10 times better than the status quo? What value do those attributes enable? So it's not just enough to say we have advanced reporting. It's to say this reporting also gets you, increases your revenue because such and such. So you have to talk about the value you provide, not just the feature. You have to, again, pick that beachhead. Who is it you're going after? Which market are you actually trying to attract? You can't be all things to all people. So start with a market that you can be excellent in. And then you have to know your market category. So what category of software, let's say, do you sell? And what are, if possible, what are some trends that make your product really relevant right now? If your product is based around, say, VR or AR, well, that might just spark a little bit more interest because it's considered more of an up and coming technology and something very high tech that new startups are really going after. So you can sort of latch yourself onto trends if they're relevant. So the work we did with April, this is kind of the net result of it. So our old positioning was all based around simpler way to send proposals. That was the headline on our homepage. And we can see that the messaging that came from our positioning work with April is all about more control, more visibility. Lots of things can happen during the closing process. You don't know why deals are getting stuck. Deals are going out with errors, pricing, discounts are being applied. You need to lock that stuff down. So that's kind of the messaging that we were using. And it resonated really well. We tested this out on cold calls and outbound cycles and found that the new customer that we were going after, this really resonated. So positioning is the first thing. The next thing is pricing. This is another report from Price Intelligently that shows how important it is to actually look at monetization as a strategy. So all too often, founders or marketers will kind of think mostly about acquisition. How do we get more customers? And what this graph shows is that if you put $1 into each of these categories, so acquisition, find new customers; retention, lose less customers, retain more of them; or monetization, extract more revenue from customers. If you put $1 into each of these buckets, you would actually have 12.7% impact on the bottom line versus the 3.3 on acquisition and 6.7 on retention. So what this is saying is that before you start increasing your ad spend, it makes sense to get control of not just retention, but also monetization. Just charge more. And there's a few things that you need to do in order to charge more. It may not be as simple as just simply jack up your prices. So you need to understand who are you selling to, and how do these segments break down, kind of like what I did, the small, medium, and large that you saw a few slides back. How do you price your product? We had to do this with Proposify. We had to figure out what is the thing that if you use more of it, it actually increases the value of the product. Because if you don't have a really good value metric, you'll find that you tap out at a certain point. So what we found is when we were using proposals as our value metric, how many proposals you create, there comes a certain point where people, even large companies, they're not really sending any more documents. For other companies, it might be usage data or the amount of data or storage, that kind of thing. And once you know your value metric, you have to know what are the features that are really going to drive upsells. So you'll find often if you've got tiered pricing, which you should, is are you putting the right features in the right pricing buckets? Essentially, if you add a feature to your most expensive plan, is the right customer going to switch to that big plan because of that feature? Or really, should they just consider that, that should be included on the small plan? That really doesn't add a whole lot more revenue or more value, I should say. And then how much do you actually charge for each tier? So this is part of a pricing exercise that we went through with Price Intelligently, who are now called ProfitWell. And this was the methodology they used, which is a very tried and true way of surveying the market and understanding how much people are willing to pay. You can't really just put something out there and say, how much do you think this is worth? You'll get a wide range of opinions and they won't be terribly valuable. But if you run a price sensitivity survey, then it asks you, what is too expensive to consider purchasing? What is getting expensive, but you would still purchase? What is a bargain? What would be a great value for money? And what is so inexpensive that you would actually question whether or not this is worth buying? If somebody hands you a Porsche and they're only charging you $500, you'd be like, I'm not going to buy that because there's probably something wrong with it. So that's the idea. When you run this survey with enough of a sample size, then you actually get this kind of breakdown of what is the ideal price point for that group, and what is too low that you're probably leaving money on the table, and just high enough that if you were to charge more, people are just not going to buy it because it's too expensive. The other methodology that they use is relative preference, and what that does is instead of just saying which feature is valuable, you actually force them to make a choice. So it's not, would you pay more for an external dashboard? It's a, what is the least important? What is the most important? And if you ask it that way, you'll actually get a much better and more reliable answer from your target audience. So in this case, you can see features that are over on the right-hand side of the chart are considered more important for this group or for this target audience. So they're going to put much more emphasis on the external dashboard, much less on premium support, and then mobile application and API integration. They're a little bit more in between, but there's still clearly some positive or negative value there. And once you have this data, then what you can do is you can slice it by segment. So you can actually say, okay, we have 3 different groups that we go after, target audiences, maybe it's by size, maybe it's by industry. And segment 1 really cares about this feature, but they don't really care about this other feature, but it's the flip or it's the reverse for one of our other target audiences. So this really helps you kind of nail down by pricing tier where you should be moving those features in your pricing. Then what you can do with this information is you can actually build out buyer personas, and you can know this is, Senior Vice President of Sales, Samantha. These are the features that this group cares about. And you can actually find what they call likelihood to buy and willingness to pay. What is the likelihood that they're going to buy this thing? And then how much are they willing to pay for it? So when we did this, we actually came to this sort of pricing plan. So we found that on the very small end, this wasn't the customer we were trying to attract, but there was a high volume of them, and they were willing to pay about $19 per seat. The other thing that we did was we switched to a per seat model. So this really contradicted my gut instinct. I never really liked per seat pricing, but the data kind of showed that it was better to price by seat than to price by document. People generally wanted unlimited documents, but they were willing to, pay another $49 a month to add another user to the platform. And then we did customized pricing on the larger tier with essentially a higher per seat count. And what this actually did for us is that the new pricing model got us so that the old, we were sort of tapping out at a certain deal size. But then after the change in pricing, we were seeing on that larger segment that deal sizes were increasing quite dramatically. So that was one of the ways that had helped us close, 20K, 50K deals. We never would have been able to close that high of ACV if we hadn't have changed our pricing. And then the last piece is your product. So you may have the same product that you're selling to different groups, but what you'll often find is that you're selling to a larger company. They're going to have unique challenges that your smaller customers just don't, and you need to evolve your product appropriately. So some of the strategies to find this out is, treat this new market almost like you're building a brand new startup from scratch. They should almost have a separate product team, which is going out and talking to these customers and trying to figure out, okay, with this product you have now, what are the gaps that are missing? Are there any gaps? Sometimes you'll find it's features that are missing, but other times you'll find that, if you actually start to add hundreds of users into this account, things become very difficult to manage. And so maybe you need to put more emphasis on the ease of use or the reliability and the stability of the product more so than features. And then it'll probably end up being a little bit of a mix. The other thing you need to do is not get caught too much in the trap of looking at who is making its way into the platform. Sales will be out there selling and they'll be bringing in deals, and there'll be a whole bunch of other deals that get disqualified or they get lost in the sales process, or they don't end up buying, or they go to a competitor. If you only look at the ones that make their way through and become customers and then complain about feature gaps or reliability, then you're going to miss out on, okay, what is the market out there really after? Because if you do a win-loss analysis on the sales side, you'll find that there's probably a lot of customers that are coming in who would otherwise make a great customer, but we're missing something that makes them not willing to buy. Another thing you can do too is just staff up your team with people who have previous experience working in enterprise software companies. If too many people on your team are only used to small customers and primarily a self-serve model, there'll just be a lot of obvious things that they're going to miss that maybe somebody who's come from an enterprise background can come in and say, okay, we know we're absolutely going to need, say, single sign-on, or we're going to need really robust reporting dashboard or so forth. So that is the 3 Ps of moving up market. The other one we've got is just a bonus, really, before we leave, is building a sales team. So this is the part that I haven't talked about a whole lot, because I think you should really spend a lot of time on the first 3 Ps before you get too far down the line or down the road of like building up a sales team and hiring a VP of sales. The reason is you'll find that if you hire a VP of sales and maybe a few sales reps too early, they'll come in and they don't have the positioning. They can't sell large enough deals and the product just doesn't do what it needs to do. They're not going to be effective, which means the reps aren't going to hit quota. You might end up blaming or firing your VP of sales or your sales team. And really, it's not totally their fault because they didn't really have anything to sell. And so you have to make sure they've got enough there to actually be successful. But let's say you've gotten the 3 Ps figured out. Now you're at the point where you can start building a sales team. So you need to understand the pipeline now. So it's no longer somebody out there becomes aware of a pain or a problem. They research it and they find your solution. They maybe sign up for an ebook or some kind of digital download or lead magnet, and then you nurture them eventually into a trial. And then if they get through their trial and they get onboarded and they start getting value, then they sign up to a paid plan. If you're going from a product-driven, product-led model to a sales-led, it's going to be a little bit different. So you're going to have still people at the top of the funnel who are researching, but now maybe instead of signing up to a trial, they reach out for a demo. And so you have to have a sales team that has some kind of a process figured out to take somebody who's interested, who doesn't want to sign up to the product, and essentially get them qualified or disqualified, get them onto a demo, make sure the demoing process is effective, then negotiate pricing, proposal, contract, and get them signed off and transition to a customer success team. That whole model has to be figured out, and you've got to figure out how to do that. So some of the strategies to start is before you really hire people and you're working on this stuff, this positioning and pricing, run some of the deals yourself before you hire anyone else to do it, because you as a founder are probably going to be decently effective at actually closing some deals. And you'll get to a point where you're overwhelmed. There's too many leads and you just don't have time in your day to both run the business and handle the sales. And then that's a great time to transition to hiring a couple of salespeople and hiring a leader to come in who can lead the team and figure out the rest of those processes and sort of deconstruct what you've been doing as a founder. So you'll need a VP of sales or some kind of sales leader, and you don't necessarily want one who's come from too big a company, because a lot of times what you'll find is VPs who have big company experience, they know how to keep the engine running for a big company, but they don't really know how to come in and build it all from scratch. And that's what you really need, is a scrappy doer, somebody who knows how to just really roll up their sleeves and get to work and build something from nothing. Another thing that you should look at doing is supplementing some inbound with outbound. Now, if you have an inbound engine that feeds the sales team tons of leads, which we do at Proposify, it's great. And most or all of our deals, save for a couple, have actually come from inbound. But it's good to get the sales team building that muscle to run outbound cycles. So that's people who have never necessarily heard of us, or they heard of us, but they haven't signed up or indicated that they're a lead. Having a sales team actually go and prospect accounts, call them, email them, get them on a call. This can just help fill in some of the gaps where maybe some months you don't have as much inbound pipeline. The other thing that you'll really need tight alignment on is your marketing and sales team. There's the historical, debate, if you will, or misalignment between sales and marketing. Sales saying, hey, there's not enough leads, or the leads are no good, and marketing saying there's plenty of leads, you're just not doing a good enough job of selling them. And you'll really need to work hard to get tight alignment between your marketing and sales leader, because ultimately they're both going to be responsible for driving revenue into the business. Customer success, I already kind of mentioned that, is a critical function to build when you have larger deals and you've got a sales-led approach. Is these aren't customers that are just putting in their credit card and figuring it out. A knowledge base isn't enough, or training videos. They're going to need a human who can take their account, onboard them, train them, maybe configure the account, and then run quarterly reviews or 6-month reviews to optimize their accounts, make sure they're getting tons of value, and then of course renew them and maybe even upsell or expand, because expansion revenue is where a lot of your growth is going to come from. And you need to hire a leader and a team who can run customer success, which is different than support. It's less reactive and more proactive. As part of your customer success, you'll also probably need some element of professional services. If the deal sizes get very big, you'll probably find that there's a lot of heavy consulting or configuration that's needed, and you can absolutely charge for that as a one-time fee. That's going to lower your acquisition costs. That's going to actually just bring revenue into the business and cash, which is never a bad thing. And you'll find that larger companies almost expect to be sold pro serves or onboarding fees when they sign up to software, because they don't want to figure it out themselves. They don't want to configure it. They want you to do it for them, and you should be charging for that. So what were the results of our move up market? So we still sell plenty of smaller customers, but we also have a component of our business with larger deal sizes. And what we found is that we're at the point where only 2.5% of our customers make up a quarter of our revenue. So that means the deal sizes are bigger, and the churn is a lot better on those accounts. So you can see in the purple line there, that side of the business, that segment started to really scale. So that is my talk. I'm going to move into some Q&A. If you want to check out the product, Proposify is the website to go to, proposify.com. You can also follow me, Kyle Racki, at LinkedIn. Look forward to your questions.